how about now? Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our FemGND Feminist Green New Deal Coalition press conference. My name is Catherine Quaid. I am the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network and a member of the FemGND Coalition. I am Payu Kayusa Nez a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla, and I grew up along the Nichiwana, also known as the Columbia River in the western part of the United States, and among high desert plateaus and along the edges of forested mountains in central Oregon. I share this because the land and my ancestors and community are one of the reasons I'm here today in this space, and I want to give gratitude to those people and places and start us off that way. And I also want to give gratitude to the lands we're on here today in Dubai, which carry their own histories, their own stewards and memories, and also want to give gratitude to all of you for being here today, and also to the incredible set of panelists that we're going to be hearing from today. I'm honored to be among these powerful voices here at COP28 and in the climate justice and feminist movements in the United States. We are, a group of US-based racial, economic, and gender just advocates, and are going to be speaking today about, feminist just transition ideas, and also our understanding of the role of the US government and delegation here at COP. As the world's largest historical emitter, the US continues to perpetuate domestic and international policies that have devastating global implications and continue to drive militarism, imperialism, colonialism, and the climate crisis. As high-level government delegates join COP today with a host of events and panels, I've been thinking about how exactly the voices here in this press conference continue to be dismissed and disregarded for the voices of corporations and big businesses as the US moves forward with their domestic and international climate policies. While the US and other governments continue to tout so-called solutions like carbon capture, blue hydrogen, and other false solutions, we are here today to state clearly that what we actually need are solutions grounded in feminist and climate justice principles, solutions that communities in the US and abroad have been building and advocating for years. Rooted in neoliberal capitalism, the current economic system is set to continue to rapaciously extract resources from the earth and drive the dual crises of climate chaos and pandemics, while exploiting the labor of people worldwide to line the pockets of wealthy CEOs, fossil fuel companies, and other large corporations. And, as an integral part of our fight for climate justice is rejecting these false market-driven solutions. This includes the effort to expose and dismantle the roots of the extractivist economy that is inextricably intertwined with the patriarchal systems that have been exploiting women and the environment for centuries. And as we see disaster capitalism play out in real time, we know that it is also time to call for a regenerative, rights-based economy that prioritizes communities and nature. As unemployment rises, food and housing are under further threat, and governments continue to insist on the expansion of fossil fuels and false solutions, it has been made clear that already there are existing and severe cracks in our global economic system. What is needed now is investment in economies founded on principles of justice, reciprocity, and regeneration. And I think a clear offering for dismantling this current extractive system is the work of feminists and care workers, climate justice advocates, and labor unions to bring forward a deep ethic of care into the conversation and policies regarding a just transition. As part of the advocacy, we are bringing with us as part of this advocacy, my organization, WECAN, is bringing with us into COP a new report called Prioritizing Care Work Can Unlock a Just Transition for All, which examines the links between care and climate and demonstrates how investment in high-quality care jobs can mitigate the worst impacts of the climate crisis, increase public funding for public infrastructure, and support economies with a just transition framework. This work is grounded in the feminist principles put forth by the FemGND Coalition as we continue forward into COP. I think it is also important to share loudly the need for an ethic of care and how we can continue to push governments to really think about how their work and negotiations are enacting an ethic of care and not just further destruction of communities and the planet. We need care for each other, care for the land, for our communities, for future generations, and for our entire planet. And in this time of colliding crises and failing infrastructures, worsening climate disasters, I do believe we have a time to act courageously, boldly, and without compromise, and to ensure a fast, fair, and equitable phase-out, to ensure proper funding for climate finance and loss and damage, and ensure a planet for current and future generations. It's time to dismantle the detrimental extractive systems that have been harming frontline communities and really truly invest in climate policies grounded in feminist solutions, human indigenous rights, and just-based approaches. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and we're just gonna pass it down to all the other speakers.
Hello all, my name is Mara Dolan and I'm the US Program Manager at the Women's Environment and Development Organization, we do for short, a global gender and climate justice advocacy and movement building organization and proud co-coordinator of the Feminist Green New Deal Coalition. I'm honored to be here amongst such powerful and fierce advocates and leaders in this Speak Out, and what I'd like to add to the conversation today is a few words on militarism and the climate crisis and the particular role that the so-called United States plays. When I think about the demands of the US that those of us who are committed to global justice and committed to holding the US accountable must include, demilitarization is front of mind for me right now. The US is the largest historical emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, and the US military is the single largest institutional emitter in the entire world. The US military is a colonizing and occupying force with over 800 US military bases outside of the US, 800. Communities within and outside of the US are subjected to environmental racism and land degradation from the land use of bases. They are used to test and store violent new weaponry, holding chemicals that poison and harm the health of communities, land, water, and air near them. The US military is also a significant source of gender-based violence and of environmental degradation in many forms. It is an institution in which so many critical intersections of injustice meet and are resourced further to commit more harm. And it's resourced largely by taxes, by public resources, right? When US policymakers are asked to search their federal budgets for more funds for social protections like food, medical care, education, or even climate finance, we are told we're asking for too much. But when more money is needed for fighter jets, for border police, for weapons development, for warfare, that money is easy to find. The US really is the belly of the beast, the central perpetuator and leader in this rampant militarization. The only security it is working towards is the security of those in power and their economic interests, not the well-being of people. As feminists, we must challenge and reclaim a human security, a people-centered security, a feminist understanding of security that demands public resources for public good, and a belief that all people deserve liberation from violence. Here at COP, we're seeing weapons industries and US government officials talk of greening the military, of making solar-powered tanks, renewable energy-dependent bases, and include climate change in all of their security reports to the government. We did not fight for militaries to become green. We do not want so-called sustainable militaries because no militaries are sustainable. We don't want renewable energy for powering colonial bases. We want renewable energy for the people, for our healthcare, our public transportation systems, to power our schools and public institutions. We will continue organizing against militarization and war, whether it is powered by fossil fuels or not. Climate justice demands demilitarization, period. And when we say that the US funds war, it is happening all around us right now. We are actively witnessing, in this moment, a US-funded and backed genocide of the Palestinian people. The US military-industrial complex, as it always has, is driving human rights abuses, land grabbing and occupation, displacement, and genocide, and we join forces with all those at COP calling out this injustice and the particular role that the US government has to play and the US militarized bases have to play in enabling it. The US sends billions of dollars to Israel every year in military funding, literally funding the bombs that are dropping on Palestine. And 2 days ago, the US announces here at COP it will give a shameful $17 million to the Loss and Damage Fund, to nations and communities who are on the front lines of climate impacts caused by US emissions. And so I say again, why is there money for war, but never money for climate reparations, for protecting people and planet? The people of Palestine, like the people of Congo, the people of Sudan, people all over the world, deserve clean and safe air, land, and water, and a life free from militarization and extraction. And as long as the US continues to drive the war machine, and the climate crisis, we will struggle against it in solidarity with all those over the world impacted by US climate and foreign policy. Thank you for your time, and I'll pass to my colleague Jackie.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. Oh, yes, thank you so much. So as we talk about what a feminist policymaking agenda looks like, we have to recognize that it's in the frame of what my colleagues already spoke about: a caring economy, a just economy, an anti-racist economy, a regenerative economy, and an economy that's rooted in the self-determination, whether it's individual self-determination or community-level self-determination for frontline communities. I was struck when I was looking through the entire agenda for this, for COP28 of side events and so forth, official side events, whether it's the blue zone or the green zone, as I literally looked through every single description, and none of the sessions was racial justice mentioned at all. And so as an organization that works at the intersection of racial justice, gender justice, climate justice, which embodies all, that was extremely disappointing and appalling when we know that racist society is what would fuel so much of climate injustice. And so when we think about the US being the perpetrator of so many of the policies and practices that drive climate change, I listed out for this a number of policies that we need to reform in order to ensure that we're walking the talk, as we kind of act like we have moral authority around human rights globally. So first off, we know that our governance system is actually governed by, as you've seen, profiteers as opposed to the people. So when we talk about overhauling our democracy, we need to actually center frontline community leadership. We need to get money out of politics so that money cannot determine who is sitting in the decision-making offices. So whether it's the public utilities commissions that govern our water systems, our energy systems, and otherwise, or just our state, local, and federal governance, we have to ensure that we have frontline communities who are represented in those offices. We know that in the United States that there has never been a Black female governor in the entire history of the nation. And when in a place where, in states like Mississippi, where there's 37% Black folks, to have that be the case is a clear sign of both the racism and the fact that profiteers are dominating our governance. When we talk about conservation and preservation of place and people, we know that there's places like Turkey Creek in Mississippi where they were constantly being flooded in that community, but the only protection that they had was a protection of the wetlands, and yet they were allowing a big developer to come through and build over acres and acres of wetlands instead of protecting the people, but instead of actually recognizing that it's people that need to be protected. It was only when they discovered a rare bird in that area that they were able to get the policies necessary to block the building over of these wetlands. And that again says the challenge around our governance structures. When we talk about disaster infrastructure, we know that places like Louisiana, their levee protection system is based on what the property values are that they're protecting instead of based on the people people that they're protecting who are the most vulnerable. So we need to make sure that we are changing that policy so that it's not property values that govern whether you're protected. Even when we think about children's education, the quality of our children's education is based more on the value of their parents' property than based on the children. So we have to recognize that we have to have quality education across whomever you are. We have to really make sure that our policies are grounded in a circular regenerative economy. So whether it's our energy systems that are, instead of being owned by people whose top priority is to make profit, we have to make sure that they are governed by people whose top priority is to ensure that everyone has accessible, affordable, and clean and sustainable energy. Same with our food systems, our water systems, our education systems. So I'm not sure where we are at time because I forgot to push my little stopwatch button. But I will wrap with a couple of words in terms of, even to echo what Mara was saying around our global practices. First of all, we recognize that with our immigration policies, that instead of welcoming people who are coming from their nations because of our imperialist policies, because of our role in driving climate change, instead we welcome people by putting them in cages, or we have officials on horseback reining people with using their reins to herd people. So we have to stop our imperialist practices so that people aren't being driven from their nations in the first place. Warsan Shire, a Kenyan-born Somali poet, says, "You have to understand that no one puts their child in a boat unless the water is safer than the land." So with that, we have to, again, hear the voice of women's leadership and recognize that it's not about people coming in to seize our riches. It's about people just trying to survive, and recognizing that we do have the abundance because we've gorged out with our extractive practices the riches of other nations. And finally, we have to do policy making around the soft policies that are so critical around health and wellness. I was just watching on the news here, even we've reached the France 24 news, the extreme the disadvantaged situation of Black women who are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. But just childbirth in general is rising. So we have to recognize this and actually not have a system that is based on, as you say, whether it's punitive basis like our carceral state incarcerating people, or we put so much into hospitals because we don't put enough into wellness in the first place. So whether it's birthing systems, reproductive justice systems, we have to shore up these types of investments. So I will stop there gratefully and hand it off to my colleague here. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Julia Bernal. I'm the Executive Director for Pueblo Action Alliance. I am also with the Indigenous Environmental Network delegation here at COP28, and I'm going to talk about water today. So my tribe is within the Middle Rio Grande Valley of the southwest region of the so-called United States, and it's an arid climate, and our river is one of the main tributaries in the region. So with that, rising temperatures from climate change, our region is now facing a drastic change in climate that we are calling aridification, and it's impacting our land and our water and our soil health. With recent climate models for our region, they have suggested that water runoff and groundwater recharge will decrease by 3 to 5% each decade. And so over the course of 50 years, that will equate to 16 to 27% decline in water runoff and groundwater recharge. And this will have a significant impact to our soil, our vegetation, and our overall biodiversity health. And with impacted soils during flooding events, water will move faster on top of soil, which means that less water will recharge aquifers, and also flood events will create devastating climate disaster scenarios. With these rising temperatures as well, in this past few years, specifically in 2022, over 904,422 acres of land in our region was burned because of wildland fires. And then we're met with major flooding events, and this caused disaster. And so with our organization and other Indigenous feminist thinkers throughout our region, we are calling for a major paradigm shift in how we're managing water in our land. Indigenous people in our region have cared for land and water and our communities since time immemorial and have used traditional methods of water management to promote groundwater recharge, sustainable farming practices and methods, promotion of ecological services, and overall protection of ecosystem health. Because of colonialism, the dominant water managerial paradigm has ignored and undermined Indigenous leadership and innovation for water management, but most importantly, Western water management has stripped the role of mother from our river. Water is now treated as a commodity and a resource, and that must be put to beneficial use. And so for feminist solutions for the climate crisis, it's going to take feminist Indigenous water management practices that will acknowledge our role as children to maintain balance and harmony and reciprocity with each other and allow our river to return back to herself. It is going to be Indigenous knowledge to help us adapt and mitigate, and it will be land back and water back to Indigenous people to ensure that we have water for our future. So I'll end with that Indigenous people's culture usually revolves around the natural world, and so we are the best people for this work. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Frances Roberts Gregory. I'm a feminist political ecologist and environmental anthropologist from Duplin County, AKA Hog Country in Afro-Carolina, as well as the DMV and Brick City, AKA Newark, New Jersey. I'm currently affiliated with Harvard University and formerly Northeastern University, which sit on the traditional and stolen lands of the Massachusetts peoples. I'm also an alum of UC Berkeley and Spelman. Finally, I serve on the steering committee of the Feminist Agenda for a Green New Deal, on the advisory board of the HBCU Green Fund, and I'm co-chair of the advisory board of the Hive Fund for Climate and Gender Justice. So my journey with the Fem Green New Deal, and I would also say the UN Women and Gender constituency, has led me to uphold many of our principles. These include rejecting false solutions, uplifting feminist economies and regenerative economies, centering youth leadership, and always centering Indigenous people's rights and leadership. I'm most proud that my feminist colleagues have supported me in processing grief in both my personal and professional lives, as I watch some of our world and national leaders uncritically embrace false solutions and tokenize women and youth leaders, as well as I lean into what it means to be an elder and veteran caretaker. As a scholar, educator, activist, I'm also committed to feminist climate action and remain in solidarity with oppressed and dispossessed peoples around the globe, including those in Gaza. I use my feminist activist research, my scholarship grounded in feminist methodologies and pedagogies, to really question what do we mean, or why do we fetishize, I should say, quantitative data analysis, and what do we mean by feminist data collection processes. I use these approaches to advocate for a feminist just transition, as well as plant the seeds for feminist climate policy, feminist economics, feminist energy justice, as well as feminist climate finance. As an anthropologist and ties to environmental funders and grant makers, I travel a lot. So in March of this year, I actually traveled with the HBCU Green Fund to Senegal, to Dakar, as well as the Sahel, with our Senegalese partner, Redes. We planted trees, we funded wells and other water infrastructure, we built relationships between African American and Senegalese students in the Sahel, and we also reimagined this idea of home and belonging. This was a very transformative as well as instructive experience, because I had to contend with not only the legacy and violence of the transatlantic slave trade as a descendant of enslaved West Africans, but also my privilege as a US passport holder. Later on this year, I participated in the second session of the Permanent Forum of People of African Descent in New York. I learned about projects around the globe led by communities of African descent and faith-based leaders to remember our ancestors and fight environmental racism and sexism, to connect reparations to environmental justice, gender justice, and climate justice. Finally, later on in August, I led 2 camping trips to historic HBCU Storer College and Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, in collaboration with the HBCU Green Fund as well as Black and Environment. These trips were to combat Black folks' fears of the great outdoors and learn more about the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. Most folk don't realize that Storer College, which closed in 1955 due to a lack of funding after Brown versus Board, was a safe haven for formerly enslaved people seeking freedom. It was also the birthplace of the Niagara Movement in 1906, John Brown's raid to end slavery, and later the NAACP and many civil rights and human rights movements. It's arguably the birth site of the US abolitionist movement, yet few vacationers know about the history of Black students and faculty who nurtured Black radical thought in West Virginia. I bring this up because traveling, bridging these cultural divides allows us to uncover forgotten histories, and that's part of my role as an anthropologist and archivist. So in conclusion, there is no climate justice without feminist funding of climate action and grassroots solutions for environmental ills. I look forward to continuing my work with the Hive Fund, the HBCU Green Fund, as well as the Green Leadership Trust to fund frontline communities and women in not only the Southeastern United States, but African institutions across the diaspora. We also must hold universities and academics accountable to the type of research they produce. Data for whom? Instead of focusing so much funding on CCS or carbon capture and sequestration, solar geoengineering, we really should be funding research on the gender and environment nexus. We also need to fund research that's going to support blue-green infrastructure. And we need to fund archivists that are going to historicize the present moment. Because if we don't tell our own stories, we will be forgotten, erased, and misinterpreted. Finally, transnational solidarity requires that we become comfortable with being uncomfortable. That means for some of us, we have to learn to take bucket showers. And we mustn't become distracted with our petty differences and forget that we share a larger enemy. We have to be the caretakers of the right details and lean into our grief as we process the daily onslaught of violence against our communities. Together we will win, and together we all have a role to play. Thank you.
Thank you to the amazing panelists. We appreciate everything you're sharing, all the work you're doing. And if you want to learn more about the Feminist Green New Deal, our principles, the reports that we put together, the political advocacy that we do, please head to our website, feministgreenNewDeal.com. And thank you everyone for being here, and another round of applause.
We're good.